And we're live.
We're live. All right.
Okay. So let's. Sorry, Harry. Sorry for all the fluctuation.
No,
would you like to introduce
it's
again?
supposed to be me.
It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be me.
Good.
It's supposed to be me. Hi, everybody. Our colloquium speaker today is Howie Wettstein. I learned yesterday actually that we're like 10 because I went to graduate school at UCLA, and at the time Joseph Almog was a kind of big personality around the department. And Howie told me yesterday that Joseph was like a brother to him. And Joseph was my dissertation advisor, so he was like a father to me, which I think means that you're like an uncle to me, and I'm like a nephew to you.
Okay, you got it.
So Howie has had, I think it's fair to say, wide-ranging interests over the course of his career, including he was big part the philosophy of language scene in California in the 70s and 80s. As he told us yesterday, he was trained in hardcore analytic philosophy, and apparently he has also acquired interest in what I think is pretty clear is hardcore phenomenology in philosophy of religion, and he's going to bring this brew to us today. So Howie, you know the format. You've got about 10 minutes if you want to take it, and then we'll launch straight into Q&A.
Sure. Taught last year on Zoom, and I got to like it actually, which is very weird, and I liked it. And so I'm not used to speaking behind a mask. It's really hard. So if you can't hear me or something, let me know. My family spent, my wife and our kids spent a couple of years in Palo Alto in the early 80s. And so I had an liaison and a visiting position, and Joseph was a postdoc. And we became friendly, and we used to spend a lot of time talking. And he would come over to my house in the evening, and my son, who was 4 or 5 at the time, 4 I think, at the time, once said to me, "Are you guys angry at each other? Why are you screaming so much?" So if you know Joseph, you know. Oh man. Okay. So I thought I'd tell you a little about my own history that fed into a transition from thinking mostly about philosophy of language and then to this kind of domain. So I grew up in a family that was not particularly religious. We're Jewish, and it was sort of the conventional stuff you do, but it wasn't serious. And I went to college at a religious Jewish college, UC-Riverside in New York. And I didn't know what to expect at all. But the minute I got there, I was exposed for the first time in my life, really, to kind of serious religion. And it was the 60s, and it had a kind of very liberal bent. Different than the way a lot of those communities have developed since then. I remember one of my teachers who I really loved, I'll tell you more about him later maybe, took his class, his religious class, to the United Nations to protest about starvation in Biafra at the time. It's a different world. And so I really got into it. And I studied hard, and I didn't do anything in high school like chase cars. But I really got into it, and I loved it. It was really amazing. And the more I got into it, the more satisfying it was. But it turns out that the study of the Talmud is about as good training for analytic philosophy as you can imagine. It's really fascinating. It's law, but it's a kind of conceptual analysis of law. And it keeps going deeper and deeper with the commentaries. And it was astounding. So I really got into this, and I thought maybe I'd make a career of that stuff. And then, given the fact that I didn't come from a religious world, the metaphysical stuff was driving me crazy. I never knew how do you believe this and why, and it's appealing and attractive, and the community is lovely, but how do you? And eventually, about five years later, at this point, I was already in the clergy program. I concluded that I couldn't do this, and I went to graduate school in philosophy. And then, 25 years later, I found myself moving back, but not because of having solved the epistemological metaphysical stuff. Just something about the life was very growing. Those of you who were there yesterday, you could hear a little of it maybe, but it really was very powerful. And over time, what I'm really trying to think about is how does somebody sort of naturalistically inclined in a kind of more Aristotelian way, I don't mean in a reductive way, how do you deal with this stuff? How do you make sense of it? What's going on? So here's a funny story. Philosophy of language was drying up for me anyway. It seemed like it became a kind of industry about belief sentences and epicycles on epicycles on epicycles. And Wittgenstein, over time, just got bigger and bigger and bigger for me. It started out, I was in graduate school, and I had no idea what was going on with Wittgenstein. And there was a professor who I didn't get along with very well. So I walked out in the hallway one day, and he was talking to a British visiting student, and she said, what are all these words about meaning? Meaning is just use. And he said, of course. And I thought I wanted to shoot myself, because I had no idea what they were talking about. So I survived graduate school, and I survived it in large part because I just loved the material so much, even though the program was not very satisfying. Anyway, so years later, after leaving Notre Dame, I'm in Riverside, and I'm finding myself thinking more and more about philosophy of religion. And I spoke on the phone to Alistair McIntyre, and I said, it's really weird. It's only after leaving Notre Dame that I start thinking about these things. He said, it's not no accident. It was a funny comment, I thought. And then I called my old friend Richard Foley, who was by this time a dean at NYU, and I said to him, my colleagues can think I'm nuts. Until yesterday, I thought about reference all the time, and now it's God. He said, yeah, Ken, you're right. That's only the first part. Fuck him. I thought that was good advice. And so I really love thinking about these things. And so, the paper, you've read it. So let's go. I don't know, questions, comments, reactions. So I'm interested in how you react to these things as well. Yes.
So, first, I'd say my history is not that dissimilar from yours. I went to Brandeis because I was pre-rabbi. I had a liberal Jewish education only for a few years. Took a philosophy course and changed directions. The only difference is I never changed fast. Cool. And so I was inclined to ask you all sorts of, straight out analytic philosophy, justify your view, tell me what you mean, kinds of questions. But I felt like at some point that I'd be missing the point of what you're doing if I tried to bring the focus there. So I started thinking about the way in which, about a problem that I am interested in and I was trying to write about. And it struck me that it was somewhat similar, and I just wanted to explore your views about that today. So, among error theorists about morality, there's this question, what to do now? I mean, our moral lives played a role for us when we were implicit realists or before we thought about this very much. So what do we replace it with? And I guess I've been thinking that there are questions about how to collective projects that seem like they don't really require that we're all doing the same activity as long as we're doing some activities in common. So the example I was thinking of was very much like when I encountered your paper. People sitting around to say grace before meals. And one of them is convinced that anything that's a Trinity wouldn't be God. And the other one is convinced that anything that's not a Trinity wouldn't be God. And yet there's a social function to saying grace together that doesn't really require that they be talking to the same being or think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started wondering, there was a place where you said that the view you're putting forward is compatible with at least some parts of religious orthodoxy. But I wondered about what your thoughts are on how what you're doing when you're standing there in shul next to somebody who thinks that they're talking to a being that they know lots about and that thinks that those stories aren't myths. You feel like that, I mean, my inclination would be to say there's so much that you're both getting out of that experience that doesn't really depend upon your sharing a conception of God, that it seems like it might be worthwhile and not dishonest in a way that I would worry about for moral reasons. And so it's certainly quite analogous to something I've been toying with when it comes to, post-morality, post-moral realism scenario. What do you think?
Okay, I appreciate the question. Remind me your first name again.
I'm Don.
Don, I'm really bad at this. So last night Lewis asked me, do you do anything like affirmation in the course of prayer? And there's lots of it, right? There's really lots of it. There's somebody in one of the scholarly books of Jewish law who says that I've thought about the nature of God for years and years and years. But when I pray, I try to be a 12-year-old. Okay? And this connects to the discussion of anthropomorphism in the paper, right? What Maimonides prayed like a traditional Jew, so what he thought this language is all wrong and that's not the way things are. So what was he up to exactly? So in the paper I talk about the fact that it's like poetry, which we personify nature and not a person, but it serves certain ends. And I need to say more about what the ends are and how it all works. So when I pray, and I do a lot, I try, it's hard, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I'm just living in the mythology, right? Sometimes I'm stunned and I'll have a thought about what's really going on in a way beyond the mythology. And they're all mixed up together. There's a lot going on. It's sort of like, I saw we went to the Broad Museum, it's a new museum in California, in LA, before pandemic. And there was an American artist whose name was not coming to me, but one of his displays was a whiteboard with a lot of junk on it, a lot of thoughts, a lot of images, things going in different directions. And I thought, this is so great. Frege thinks is to entertain a proposition, right? I don't know that we almost ever do that. Active thinking is sort of like, there's so much going on, so many dimensions and directions, and you capture it a little bit sometimes with like free association practices where, well, you think you have a thought and you go to write it down through working on a paper, and you realize, wait, this goes in 14 directions. I don't know. What was I thinking? So there was a paper by James Thompson, Institute at MIT, in which he envisaged, this is all coming to me because of your question, and I appreciate it. He envisaged a situation where someone says something, they think it's perfectly clear, and then Frege figures out about scope distinctions, and all of a sudden, wait, there are two very different things you might have met, at least two. And so So this is an article that's critical of propositions. So what was the thought you expressed exactly? You don't even know what to say about which of those, right? So I have this mushy feeling about thought, about thinking, that it's like that black whiteboard. There's a lot going on, kind of, and so when I pray, who knows? There's so much happening. And when I go with the mythology, it's not like I'm temporarily a realist. I'm participating in the way that you do in theater. I don't know if that's totally accurate, adequate, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
And the fact that others aren't doing the same thing.
Yeah, they're all doing different things. I sort of wonder when you said at the beginning about we used to be realists. I doubt it.
Yeah.
Certain philosophers used to be realists, but I'm not sure that ethical participants in the ethical life exactly were realists in the sense of thinking about ethical properties or who knows what. They were just being good to each other. Or not. Anyway, so that's the beginning of a discussion. I really appreciate the question. Somebody call on, should I
I can call on people if you prefer.
Yeah, do that. So now.
Okay. Randall?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, my name is Randall. Thank you for the paper. I guess my question is, in the broad sense, my question is, to whom is this paper written? Right? And so I'll stick to, I'll try to put to aside the kind of rationalist foundational questions, right? Let's put those aside. Let's just ask about kind of experiential aspect. Right? So I think there might be like three different kinds of people on the three different categories. Right? So in the one category, you get people that, of their experiences of the world, none of those experiences seem to have attached to them or could have attached to them this kind of feeling of awe that one might be able to associate with an experience of being of divine or God. Right? They can't find. The same way people might like just have a completely inept ear for music, right? I mean, I might be a musician if I had even a minimal ear for music. I do not. I'm a philosopher. So one category that just cannot have of their experiences of life that character in these experiences which might admit of the divine. Other people, like St. Teresa, as you mentioned in this talk yesterday, they have these experiences. They can be coded either as divine or not, depending on the backgrounds that they might bring to these experiences. And right, some of these people might say, like, how should I interpret these experiences that I have? How should I interpret the awe that I feel? They can interpret that as religious or not. And I think the third category of people cannot help but experience the world in a way which is kind of marked as divine. Like they have to. They feel like, I see the presence of God in all of these things, and I cannot but feel that. It seems to me as though of the first category, people that just cannot have these experiences as like marked as divine in any way, no matter how hard they try, they could say something like, look, I participate in all sorts of communities with which I would like to be able to kind of coexist in some of the way that Don was talking about. I've got family members, I've got friends who speak about religion, speak about the divine in ways that are very serious. I would like to get a kind of share in these conversations. I'm looking for something to which I can attach the word God so that I can at least share in these experiences, even though I know they're not sharing any of these kind of other things. So people in that first category might say, like, I'm looking for some way to be able to use this kind of God language in a way which does not feel like it's betraying my own ideals or principles, but I know that's not going to actually like mark this kind of experience, which is an experience of the divine. Right? So I can imagine maybe that first group, maybe that there'd be some help in this paper for doing that, but it seems like that's not what your goal is. Right? I think your goal is not to say, here's a way to use this God language in a way which kind of allows you to seem as though, or feel as though you're talking about the same thing, even though you're not, right? It seems to me as though your paper is primarily addressed towards that second category, the category of people that have some experience that might be marked as divine, one way or the other, and you say, okay, here is how you can understand these experiences of actually engaging in this I vow with God, even, if you weren't to kind of how to interpret, how to code that off if you feel these experiences, right? So, and if that's the case, then it seems like you're kind of leaving out all people in that first category, all people in that third category, and you're just kind of addressing the paper to people in that second category who have experiences, they are marked as of awe as of some kind, and they want to know what to do with it. But since I take myself maybe as being in that first category, that category of people that, I have a lot of experience about the world, they don't strike me as being infused with this experience, the divine ways you kind of talk about. I'm wondering, is there anything for me in the paper, or is it just like, would it just give me some way of understanding how I might translate the sorts of things that I might feel about the world into this kind of God language, even though it's not quite the same thing? I don't know if that question made sense, but
it's good. Good. I think I wrote this paper for me. No, I'm not kidding. I'm trying to figure out how I should be thinking about these topics that really interest me. And, I sometimes think that publishing in philosophy is like a message in a bottle in the ocean. Maybe once in a while somebody will read it, So I'm really trying to think through an issue in a way for myself. When you described the first group, there were two different things. One is you said, I don't mean it's critical, I just mean getting a hold of it. You first said, someone's like they're tone deaf to awe. And then you said, and maybe that's what you meant, but it sounded more like they can't get a hold of all of the experiences of the divine, what it might mean, or how you connect to it, or those things. Those seem different, right? So the Woody Allen quote I had yesterday where somebody says of a very religious person, his face is not about logic, it's about an ear for music. Right. So ear for music is an interesting image for me to focus some of these things. Pretty rare for you said you were in the first group. Do you not have a sense of awe at various kinds of things?
Yeah, I would say that whatever feeling of awe I have is certainly not marked or characterized as the sort of awe that admits of a kind of religious interpretation.
Yeah.
So it's not transcendent in any way. Beyond,
That seems that's plausible. Yeah, I feel like it's a permeable membrane, though, to go from one to the other. I showed a class a little clip of called Flash Mob. Is that familiar? That's where they start. Yeah. So it's in Germany, and they were playing the Ode to Joy, and kids were in the classroom was crying. It was just really something. Now, if somebody says that's not about religion or God, I certainly get that, right? I don't know. It's sort of like God has become for me the most natural idiom for these kinds of things. And I'm trying to think about how to make the transition exactly. Why would you bother with an idea of God? I mean, human goings on is plenty, and all experiences and all these things. So I remember yesterday I made this joke about reminding you repeating this thing about the San Francisco Symphony playing Handel's Messiah, and I said to my wife, the problem with atheism is that it cuts down on religious experience, because what happened was so powerful that I felt like, God, I get it. I wasn't feeling worshipful of God, but I was getting it in a way that's more than just, So I guess what's happened to me over time is that I sometimes think it's a little bit like what they call intertextuality, where one thing refers to something else and it's all connected. God is a kind of connector word for me. All these things that go on with awe and with love and with gratitude and so that's just the beginning of an answer. It's not really, the question's really good. The question is how you get from awe, which is real enough from time to time, although my grandson is 9, is shocked that I know the word awesome. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we'll come back to that, but I appreciate the question.
You got a follow-up? Sort of, I think. So what do you say to someone who, I'm not sure if I would say I'm in the same next to it, but someone who has these kinds of experiences of awe, but their first instinct is to just come up with a naturalistic explanation for it, or like explain it, give the best sort of scientific story they could tell to explain it. Do you think they're missing something with that story?
Well, a scientific story, it's hard to know what this means now. It might mean a neurological story, in which case that's not as opposed to this. I also don't, what this kind of thing has done for me is to enhance my life in a million ways. And it's very powerful. But I don't for a minute think everybody should do this, or it's the right way. It's almost like an acquired taste anyway, right? I could really, so it's not like I would criticize a person who asks Randall's question, like who says, it's off sometimes, I get off, but what does it do with God? How do you get that going? And on my view, it's not, you don't get it going by a proof of the existence of God, that's for sure. In a way, it raises the question of how I went from one to the other, right? Because I did. And it was from one to the other, exactly like you're describing it. And that, I have to think about this more, but that experience at Handel's Messiah is very significant in this way, I think, of going from what starts as I'm moved by the music to, it's not just the music, I'm moved by the whole drama that they're describing in a way. Yeah, maybe more will come out in the course of our discussion. It's good. Yeah.
I think kind of adding on to the point you were making, what you said in the paper about having this aspect of your life, the second time you came into it, being more analogous to the furniture in the living room as opposed to the actual foundation of the house.
Oh boy.
I really love that little explanation for the phenomenon.
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really apt.
I forgot that I said it in the paper, but it's a big thing in my thinking about these things.
No, I really love that.
Let me tell you how it came about. There's a guy named Jack Miles who wrote a book called God, a Biography, God, a Biography. And it's really a very nice book. He's a guy who was a Jesuit priest who was sent to Jerusalem to be their scholar of Old Testament. And he told me in the course of studying at the Hebrew University, he came across a professor who referred to the president of the university as an Orthodox Jew who doesn't believe in God. So that shook him up. He had no idea what the hell that could mean. So I don't know if that's what got him going, but a bunch of things did it. In the end, he dropped out of the church. He's now a religious, sort of liberal Protestant. He has kids and stuff. And so he and I talk from time to time. The book, by the way, God, a Biography, is worth a look. It's kind of, he set out to write a book about the Bible, meaning the Old Testament, New Testament. The more he got into it, the more he saw, wait, you got to treat them completely separately, because he began to see the New Testament as a rereading of the old thing. And so it's very insightful, the book. But I don't know if anybody would want to work through it, because it's kind of a commentary on the Bible as he keeps going. But
the first chapter, just to get the picture he's got of, he says, if you treat this like literature and you really read it, you'll see this great character development on the part of God from the beginning to the end. And it's very interesting. So I'm talking to this guy. I talk to him from time to time. He recently retired from UC-Irvine. And he said that to me. I don't know if he was talking about his views or about mine, but he said, you know, people think of doctrine as the foundation of the edifice. But I don't know, we or me, or I don't know who he was talking about, think of it as the furniture in the living room, meaning it's not insignificant. You know, the furniture in the living room says something about the family and the way it relates to the world and to each other, and who knows, right? It's not insignificant, but it's not the foundation at all. So go on, I stopped you.
Well, I just think it kind of goes to show that it's there not to like be the entire like purpose of your life necessarily, but it enriches it. Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, for some people, of course, it's going to be the purpose of their life, and that's going to be the way that it enriches their life the most. But I think that pretty much right at the beginning of the paper, you're talking about Kant and his super rationality and
yes.
categorical imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just like quickly kind of explain what that means?
Ask one of the people who teaches ethics. Yeah, sure. No, who teaches Kant?
How can I actually sort of took issue with that characterization. He calls it the supreme principle of practical rationality. So that would be the model of this kind of idealized notion of, you know, purified rationality. I thought that was actually wasn't the right part of Kant to look at.
Okay.
So I'm not the one to.
You know, I'm not a Kantian scholar.
Okay.
Right. I was sort of voicing my picture of what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, I would have said that's a picture we've inherited.
The picture.
That I don't know that is the right.
That's the right one. Yeah. David Kaplan tells a great story about he was criticizing Frege, which was a big part of his work. And he delivered it at Oxford. And some Fregean at Oxford said, Frege never said any such thing, but if he did, he'd be right. It's like a neo-Fregean. So, yeah, so that at least, I'm happy to hear that it is the picture, at least, you know, even if it's not the right deep story about Kant. Yeah. So the picture is there's a principle of one or a few or something that called the categorical comparative, and when you apply this major principle, maybe one form of it is do unto others as you want them to do unto you. There's several forms of it, and maybe they come to the same thing, maybe they don't. But when you apply that principle to actual situations, you get an imperative out, like do this or don't do that. That was the picture. But somehow it's supposed to be a kind of a rational approach to morality. Okay. So I'm reading this book. The book I mentioned there has been tremendous in my life. It's been really funny. I found out about it on Twitter. Some philosopher in South Dakota was talking about this book, and I thought, I like books, as my wife can tell you. Our house doesn't have room for us anymore. And so I'll get this book, and if I don't like it, I was blown away. It's in journal form. He's a guy who found it really hard to write philosophy. He doesn't do it well when it's an article. But in journal form, he took me through a couple of years of his thinking in a way that was very powerful. And he was the source of my thinking that he speaks about the categorical imperativeness that flows in our lives. He doesn't think it has to do with any kind of major principle or anything like that. And it struck me in the paper that, so that's it's really about our responsiveness, and it sounds like Levinas to some extent also. It's really about our responsiveness to situations than it is about applying the principle to them, which appeals to me anyway, because I'm skeptical about. When I started graduate school, I wanted nothing else than to study rationality, and as I get older, it's not because it doesn't matter, but somehow it doesn't seem like the way in for me to these topics that I care about. Yeah.
Well, this is actually not me, but Arthur.
Arthur?
So,
Yeah. Can anybody hear me? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So those passages earlier in your paper about the categorical imperative kind of reminded me of an essay by Philippa Foot, where she was criticizing the idea of a categorical imperative and was emphasizing people bonding together and just feeling committed together to certain important things like defending Leningrad against the Nazis or Stalingrad or something. There's no shame in that. We can't give some rational demonstration. We just have certain feelings and a certain determination supported by those feelings. Now, I do think that the problem maybe for a more traditional Kantian would be, how do we distinguish this sense of moral concern, commitment, conscience, whatever, from just being an obsessive compulsive, right? People will say, I must do this, I can't do that, right? People have all kinds of subjective feelings of, it's not optional, this is what I must do. How do we sort out the musts that are, the appropriate from the ones that are not? I'm not saying that Kant solves that problem either, but it seems like a lot of your work here is, I would put it, and maybe you would too, experiential. That in the realm of religion, religious experience. And, I think I'm remembering some essays by Leo Beck long ago that were translated into English by Walter Kaufmann, because Walter Kaufmann thought Leo Beck's German was so eloquent and was not going to be available, of course, to people who speak only English. So he translated some essays, and one of them was contrasting religion that is a religion of mysticism and ecstasy and that sort of thing from a religion of living and practice. And so one of the things, I do think one of the most prominent of prophets was Isaiah, and he has a mystical experience, a revelation where there's God and these angels, whoever they are, shouting back and forth to each other, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. It's a very mystical experience, but most of Isaiah is really about living and doing. It's not about having that experience. So I think some aspect of at least Jewish understanding of religion is missing from your approach. You've got this, and maybe emphasizing Buber does bring that out even more, but I would say that, the classic biblical example of a mystical, of a very present, God is present. What's he do? He answers the call. He hears God saying, who's going to go? Who's going to go for us and do this? He says, okay, I'm here. I'll do it. So it's a lot about being motivated to do things. So I'd like to know, go back to your remark about prayer. Prayer is important to you. You sometimes succeed, you sometimes don't. What would you count as a succeeding at prayer? What makes prayer succeeding? I can tell you what I think is the classic Judaic answer, but you tell me what your answer is.
Well, tell me that first.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, since I think everyone but us is having trouble hearing my computer. It's not very loud, so I just wanted to recap first. So the question is great. What counts as success at prayer?
That was that was
the last question.
That's the last one, yeah.
If there's anything else you want to, you're responding to in there, I think it would help if you asked Arthur's question again and answer it if you don't mind. Sorry.
I couldn't possibly do that.
Not the whole thing, just whatever you're responding to.
I'm open to it, and if you want. So the last thing I got, but there were other pieces of it. You suggested that something big is missing from the way I was approaching it, with which
Right.
I'm not surprised at all. But what was it exactly? Was it the mystical side?
No, I think, well, I don't know how clear I'm coming across here, but I think the mystical you've got.
Okay.
You have that. What seems to be missing is a sense of why certain things matter and why it matters that we are involved in doing anything. Ortho practice, as it were. I mean, you try to weave in some of the practices later on, but it's I don't know if it's very convincing because you've been so focused on the experiential, as it were. So, and that's why I asked about prayer, because some people might say that a successful prayer is one that gets you in a state of mind where you're able to go out and do some important things in the world, tikkun, or, help start repairing the world or something like that. And I would say that, somebody like Isaiah, who has the very classic mystical experience, there are very few other prophets have any experience like that. Maybe Ezekiel is always a little bit mysterious and mystical, but Isaiah has this famous thing. They put it in every other Judeo-Christian religious service as well. But most of what he has to do, what does he talk about? The fast, right? The fast isn't to, have this experience of degrading yourself. It's about understanding suffering and giving your bread to the poor and so forth and so on. So I was curious what you considered to be a successful prayer experience for you.
So I think of it, I mean, this connects with what goes on in the paper. I'll come back to the other part as well. Buber, his main deal is I, thou, as opposed to I, it, which means there are casual moments with one another and with things in the world. And then there are these moments that you feel like you really made contact. So for me, the question is something like, think about two conversations. Like, one in which, you give a talk at a philosophy conference and people ask questions, and every once in a while you feel like you really made contact with somebody, but often it's I, it, a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't mean this group by any means, but I mean, I've been in places where, first of all, it gets rough. And secondly, it's not fun. And you're not really making contact. So, on the other hand, once in a while you give a talk at the APA or some conference in which someone comes up afterwards and you can see from the way they talk to you, they were really, really listening. And it's very powerful when that happens. That's what successful prayer is like for me. It's true that various kinds of experiences, this goes back to some of what I was talking about yesterday with Dewey, various kinds of experiences yield an outcome of a certain kind, like you're able to go out in the world and work for justice. That's great. But I'm not thinking about that when I think about successful prayer. That's wonderful if it happens. It's character development and all that. But I mean, successful prayer means I was really focused and felt, and for me, it's always an as if I made contact. I was really there. So that's what I think of as successful prayer. As far as so you thought I had the mystical part or the experiential part, but not so much the practice, was that?
Yeah, not so much the ethical purposefulness part of it. The, tikkun, the idea that, this idea of God is somehow this cosmic thing that's so important, but God didn't quite finish it. It left us something to do. We wouldn't be too bored. We have something to do, and we are close to God. When we do that, we're partnering with God, right? You have this idea, you're praying and you felt you made contact. I guess there are people who would say they make contact, or they feel they're making contact, when they are motivated to do certain things to make the world a certain way.
So that's
then they're on the wavelength with God.
That's like the first question you asked about, a group that gets together and feels passionate about a certain end. Mm-hmm. And how that, and the Kantian will say, needs to be distinguished in some rational way from other groups that are not, yeah. So that's a separate question, but let me come back to this one. Let me answer it obliquely. In my first round of dealing with religious things in college, the only options I knew about were sort of theological orthodoxy or giving it up, buying the metaphysics and whatever epistemology that would need. And I couldn't make it work in the end, but that's where I lived. And there were other ideas that were part of the religious story that I just couldn't pay attention to because there was too much going on. One of them was the idea of the Messiah. Okay, so in the Jewish context, it's the idea of, it depends, there were different stories about what to say about it, but surely it has to do with human creatures getting their act together and the world being a different kind of world because they get their act together. That's not all of it, but that's a big part of it. So turns out when I came back to religious life, that sort of idea meant a lot to me and became central. Not in the sense of, I believe that will happen. I don't believe that will happen. The truth is, it's crazy. What we see about one another, I want us and our kids to survive, but it's quite a thing to hold before your mind. The idea of really getting it together, all of us together, and the related idea of every small step towards that is cosmically significant. Okay, and that's on the topic you're talking about. So for me, they come together in that sort of way. Mm-hmm. So I'll leave the other question for now, but we can come back to it about the rationality thing at the beginning, if that's okay. Thank you.
All right, Matt. Is this a question on your own behalf?
This is on my own behalf. Let me just sort of do a thing I have to do and make sure that I don't accidentally hang up while I'm doing it. Okay. So I just this is what you said reminded me of something. What do you think about that thing? When you were talking about Maimonides' view that God doesn't have any properties, that reminded me somewhat of what Kierkegaard says in Fear and Trembling about the teleological suspension of the ethical, that faith sort of acts outside of like universal laws and has to do only with the particular. And did you see those as like related?
Say more because I don't get it yet. I'd like to.
Do you know the Kierkegaard at all? Probably better than me because it's been a long time since I looked at it.
I've read it. I've taught it. I have no idea what's going on.
Okay, so yeah, you're better off. You're better off than I am. So this is
one of my undergraduates in the middle of this class. We looked through the biblical passages, and I've now written a paper about the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac, but that's years later. At the time, I was just trying to figure out what was going on, so we looked at the biblical passage. We looked at some midrash, which is Jewish commentary on traditional Jewish commentary, and then we read Kierkegaard. And some guy said to me, "This class is insane." I got it. It was very hard.
So you're saying, why do I sort of connect it? So what you said here is, for Maimonides, God's perfect unity does not permit even conceptual division. God cannot be the bearer of properties at all. And sort of my thought is that, like, properties are what we need to communicate anything about God to someone else. Like, if I want to say, I want to talk about God, and I don't just say the name. I say, well, God is loving, God is angry, God is this. And those are all properties. And that, like, I really don't understand Kierkegaard, I'm sure, but it seems like he's saying there something like, acting in faith is something that we cannot communicate to anything else. That in that way we're putting the particular over the universal, because whatever principle you act on that could lead you to sacrifice your son, like this is like what Fear and Trembling is about, is the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, except not. And
That's good.
And saying like that goes outside any possible principle. What must be done there is something that couldn't be communicated. So there, I mean, they both
I see.
seem to have that kind of theme of incommensurability.
Right. No algorithm in either case. Yeah. They're from such different worlds, though. I don't mean just biographically, but Maimonides is entertaining some kind of Neoplatonic conception of unity that I can't get a grip on. I don't know what he's, and somehow he thinks of the, at the end of his famous book, The Guide for the Perplexed, he kind of pokes fun at conventional religion, including conventional Talmudic study. These are people, he has a parable of the castle, and everybody's wandering around and nobody knows how to get into the middle to see the king. And it turns out, as he tells the story later on, the king is reason, which is really bizarre. I thought the king was God, but anyway, they can't get in. And wait, why did I start on this one? Yeah. Oh, and at the very end, he gives his conception of what it is to have the sort of arch religious moment. And he associates God with the active intellect of Aristotle. And he thinks that the arch religious moment is not a community praying or anything like that at all. It's the individual sitting alone and thinking the right thoughts that connect her to the active intellect. That doesn't sound at all like Kierkegaard, right?
Hey,
No.
Probably not, unless it's
Okay.
like, the thing Kierkegaard's secretly thinking when he's not being one of the authors.
Yeah. But Kierkegaard is, I mean, they have in common no algorithm.
Yeah.
Because no it's, okay.
I have two questions and I can't decide which to ask.
Ask them both. That was like yesterday when you said, we only have time for a quick question. And the guy said, my question's long, and then Katie jumped in. It was great.
So one of the questions maybe connects back to a moment earlier in the conversation where you were responding to Randall and Liam. And I guess I was wondering, I was sort of perplexed at that moment in the paper where, so this is on page 9, kind of in the middle of the page, you say, now let's say that when being comes alive for one, religious language, religious consciousness comes with it. And I guess I was sort of thinking, I'm not sure if that, like, what is the implication there that religious language, religious consciousness comes with it for you, that religious language, religious consciousness sort of is a natural fit. Religious language and religious consciousness necessarily comes with it. And I guess at the very least, it seems like you're sort of suggesting here that religious language and religious consciousness, there's something that they add at that moment.
Yes.
And I guess I wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about what it is that religious language and religious consciousness add. Like, why not just kind of leave?
Yeah, so I see that this does connect to Randall's question. It's definitely not metaphysical necessity.
I had a feeling.
It's an allusion to Joseph. So here's the feeling I had. It's good that you draw attention to that because I'll look later at those passages and see what I want to do with it. Someone has a kind of intimate experience with another person or with something in nature, and that doesn't feel with it like, and this is Randall's question, it doesn't feel like the transition from that to God is sort of quick, right? Well, I swim in the mornings and I look at the sky, and sometimes it helps that being old, I think, in this way, because you kind of are conscious of the fact that you don't have forever, and that sometimes I have this. I was talking to my wife and I met this young, lovely woman in Turkey. She was a religious Muslim. I went to a Muslim conference, and I told her I didn't believe in the afterlife, and she almost died right on the spot. And she said she never met anybody religious who didn't believe in the afterlife. And I was talking about how awesome death is, and how at the moment of an experience of something unbelievable, to think that someday this will just poof, right? Wow. And some of that's built into what happens to me when I'm floating and looking at the sky. But it's not automatic to go to those places. You can just look at the sky and feel like it's beautiful. You can feel sometimes more that it's intense and maybe awe-inspiring in some little way. I don't know. But I guess what I was thinking is something like, when you're not just looking at the other person or the piece of the sky or whatever it may be, but somehow you're prompted to think about being, and this I need help with because I don't know what I'm talking about exactly, then it seems like you've almost made the transition.
Yes, that's the part where I'm
Maybe not automatically, I don't know, but it's not just, so I say in the paper, you can think about being without anything like this at all, right? As I say, I don't quite know what I'm talking about with this gerund. It's very hard for me. But it's not thinking about it, it's feeling stunned by existence, or say, no, I don't know. If you're stunned that way, I somehow feel like, whether you call it God or not, something very big has happened.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to sort of separate out the sort of phenomenology of being stunned in that way.
Right.
Like the kind of characterization of that
right.
sort of experience from the religious language and religious consciousness. And I was sort of thinking, it seems to me at least that you could have the former without
right.
sort of coding it
right.
using
I'm
religious
sure that,
language or religious
yeah.
consciousness. And then it was sort of seeming to me like you thought, okay, but there's some benefit, there's something, I don't know, apt about
yes.
coding it religiously, or
yeah.
Or
yeah.
there's some sort
right.
of meaning making that comes from coding it, and that's the bit that I
right. So this needs more attention. I'm sure it's a good question. I feel like if I had that feeling, not just about this or that, but about being, I could think to myself, wow, I'm getting close to those religious guys. Maybe this is what they were talking about.
I guess I was thinking that you could have that kind of experience and not think of it in religious terms at all, and sort of, having the kind of experience where.
Okay, so this raises, if I can interrupt for a second,
yeah.
This raises the question of what the religious terms add exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a project. What do they add?
Can I follow up on that?
Of course.
So So it seemed to me that if you start to recognize this as repeat appearances,
Yes.
despite the differences in setup. So there's a particularly stunning tree out there, right? You might be struck by that tree and have a thought like this. It's a personifying thought. Hello, old friend.
Yeah.
Right. There you are again. Right. And so if you personify in that way this kind of reaction, it does tend to, well, it personifies, right? And that I think might bring the phenomenology closer. I find that kind of personification relatively natural.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it as I think of it as a psychological work of human beings. But you could take it in a different direction.
So we were walking down the street just talking about this question about, because I thought about the part of the paper where I talk about anthropomorphism and that Maimonides, who's very anti-anthropomorphist, prayed the traditional anthropomorphic prayer, and what was going on with him? What was he thinking exactly? And it made me think about personification. So you might ask, what do we gain from personification? If you read some poetry that makes nature into a she or whatever it might be, what's the literary gain? What's the gain in human anything from that? So I want to think about this more. I don't know exactly, and I think the same question arises about anthropomorphism. What do we gain by? Imagine Maimonides was right, and God is the active intellect, or who knows what. What do we gain by superimposing on that personality and personhood? Right? I think there's an answer, but I don't feel articulate about it. But I thought of something in this connection. What was that? There's a biblical, right near the binding of Isaac story. I think that's chapter 22 in Genesis. Chapter 18 is a different story where God decides he's going to destroy Las Vegas. Right?
In Bergen.
Yeah. And these two evil cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, he's going to destroy them. And he says something like, how can I do this without telling my beloved Abraham who's known me? Now, known in biblical Hebrew, I mentioned this in the paper, is intimacy. He gets me. He really gets me. So he talks to him. And it's a crazy passage. He says, Abraham says to him, what are there 50 people that you're going to kill the whole city? Are there 50 good people? And God says, okay, if there are 50, I won't. Right? Abraham says, far be it from me to argue with you. But what if there are 40? And there's some Swinburne or somebody talks about, because he, in the course of this bargaining, he says something, who am I but dust and ashes? So some theologian says, you see, he was feeling very lowly. And I thought, no, he's arguing with the dean about resources. He's arguing. He's kind of saying, who am I to argue with you? But 40, they end up with 10. Okay, and then the passage ends. And the way the passage ends is it says that God left, and then Abraham left. And when I read this, I thought to myself, that sounds backwards. If you were the king, you balance, scrape, and leave. So how come the king leaves first? So I thought, this is very literary and iffy. I thought maybe it's supposed to be telling us that he was stunned by Abraham. Right? That God was stunned by the fact that this person in such a dangerous situation is calling on these ethical things in a way that you can see his heart is there. Now, why did I tell that story? Because you couldn't have that story without personifying God in the way we do. And somehow those stories are very powerful for us. So I feel like this question of how you get from awe to God, it's really basic. And when I just think about my own life, God, has it developed in these ways since the time it went from awe to God? And that's not an advertisement for other people. There are lots of ways to skin a cat, but one of the things that we say in the prayer stuff is you ask that you be sanctified by the commandments. Okay? Now, I thought about that and I thought, I've met religious people who are awful. I've met religious people who are wonderful. And you're asking, let these practices make me into one of the good guys in a very serious way. So I don't know how that all comes together. I said a lot of things. But I feel like the fundamental things what Randall raised and you raised about how why God in all of this? Why religion in any way? Yeah.
I have a question from Genevieve, who was at your talk.
Yes, please.
She couldn't attend today. She was hoping you would talk some about Buber's views about Nietzsche. She said that.
We have a Kantian here. Do we have a Nietzsche person?
I don't believe so.
Because it isn't me.
Oh, no. She's asking you.
Yeah, I don't mind. So ask the question. Maybe we'll jointly.
So Genevieve says that Buber picked some aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy while ignoring various anti-religious bits. Could you talk some about the esteem with which Buber held Nietzsche?
No. Okay. I wish I could.
Kate, number 2?
Yes, good.
Yeah. So my other question was about the sort of the way that you characterize the phenomenology of like the I-Thou
Yes.
moment, and in particular the I-Thou moment where the Tao is being. And it struck me that the way in which you characterize that phenomenology is as involving a kind of acute awareness of oneself in relation to the thou. So there's a kind of like it seemed to me there was a kind of like, I don't know, like the like hyper awareness of self, like relationally positioned or something like that. Whereas when I reflect on experiences in my own life that I think seem to have some of this character, one thing that seems really distinctive about those experiences is a feeling of kind of losing oneself, or losing a sense of the bounds of oneself, and so I was wondering if I think this in a way might be an artifact of the language that you use here, so it might not actually be a feature of your thinking about I-Thou moments, but it does seem to me like an artifact of the language that you use here to describe them is that there's a sense in which like the boundaries of the self are like very present in the I-Thou moment.
Interesting.
And that seems like sort of at odds with at least one sort of phenomenological experience that
good. I agree about the phenomenology you were talking about. So Buber, I'm not a scholar of Buber, but he was tempted by mysticism, not in the sense that the guy who asked the question was speaking of it, meaning experience, religious experience, but real mysticism where you get swept up into the unity of the other or some such thing. And in an earlier book, he writes about this, and it sounds that way. In this book, it doesn't sound that way so much. So he wants to insist there's I and you, and neither of us is getting absorbed in the other. Okay? But for sure, there isn't a super, I mean, sometimes in philosophy you hear people, I associate this with Kantians, but I'm probably wrong. So, you know, with sort of a really sort of emphasis on the self. And I'm not saying that right, so sorry. But I agree completely, right, that when you're caught up in an I-thou moment, you're not thinking about you as bounded, right? You're there. I think in the earlier treatment, he was thinking about something really mystical where somehow the self is lost or something. And he wants to say, no, the self isn't lost. But given that the self isn't lost, it's not what I'm thinking about at all. I'm thinking about thou. I'm caught up in it. I don't know. I don't know if that's adequate, but
I think in a way what was just kind of like, I don't know, like rubbing me the wrong way almost was the language of like having the thou take hold of me or work like or come alive for me or like work its magic on me or something like that. I feel like there's something like bounded about the
I hear you.
me there that feels like it's not like I'm seized by this thing that's outside of me. It's that and then I don't know exactly what the right way to express this is, but something like somehow I like there's a dissolution of the boundary between myself and the thing in a sense. I mean, I agree with you that it's not like the self, it does not seem to me like the self
actually dissolves
is
into
annihilated.
Right.
But it also seems like it's not quite right to sort of think that thou is like operating on the self and the way to.
No, it's as if it's addressing me. He says at times, right? It feels okay. I don't know. I don't know about this. It's like the picture of a union, where union means neither side is annihilated or anything like that. Doesn't mean the attention is on me as a part of it, but I am a part of it. I know that. You know, I have a footnote, I think, where Bugby talks about this as a closed circuit. You know, yeah. I wanted to say that how thrilled I am to be here, by the way. I didn't mean this as a closing comment, but just as a comment. It's, I mean, I like the rest of us, I've been caught up in, you know, what do you call it? Not going anywhere. Stuck. My wife, who's a psychologist, would probably call this, what? Must have a word for this. Narcissism or something.
Cabin fever?
No, she thinks everything is narcissism. So.
All right, I'm gonna bail you out. Randall.
Good.
Do we still have time? I have a long wind up for a short question.
Late,
We got time, we got time, Randall, for your question.
Okay, like I said, it's a long wind up for a short question, so I apologize in advance for that.
Can
I
I
was thinking.
Can I just take a minute before that?
Of course.
I was once chairing a session at the APA, and Ruth Marcus asked a question that took about 20 minutes. And then I said to her, could you repeat the question?
That's one way to run that.
Yes.
I was prompted to ask this question in part because you were talking about your experience of lying on your back, floating in the water when you swim in the morning, and looking at the sky, and also you're talking about, Beethoven's Ninth, and this kind of experience you get in listening to that. And so, so there's a scene in the movie Immortal Beloved, which is not the great movie.
Which movie?
The movie Immortal Beloved.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I don't know it, but yes.
So there's kind of one notable scene in the film, right? It's kind of coming to the climax of the film. A lot of it's kind of overly wrought, it's overly done, right? It's basically like, Beethoven remembering himself when he was younger, and his father, kind of lecherous, abusive, all these things. And you get like, frequent kind of quick cuts between father doing bad things, abusing Beethoven wanting to run away, escape, blah, blah. And he runs to the woods, and then the cuts slow down, and you get to this moment where this like young Beethoven, 12, 13, whatever, kind of takes off his tunic, takes off his shirt, and gets into this pool. And it's a really close scene initially, kind of Beethoven getting into this pool, it's kind of muddy pool, and lies on his back. And at that point, kind of the camera is just an overhead shot of him in this muddy pond, and it kind of slowly, pans out. And at that point, there go no more cuts. It's just slowly panning out again, like this is on top of Beethoven's Ninth that's playing, the string section. And it just kind of floats up and up and up. And what you see is just, so first you get like the reflections of the stars of the sky in the pond as he's lying on his back, right, looking up, trying to escape from the roar run. And it just keeps pulling up and up and up. And what you get is just more and more stars. Right? So like the forest has disappeared. It's just him in this pond, dark pond, reflecting all the stars around him. And it just goes up and looks like he's basically like floating in the universe, right? Like amongst all the stars. And it's actually, and so the scene is like at that moment, like it's the one moment of the film that actually kind of earns the viewer response. I think it actually is a well done scene. But the reason why I was kind of bringing this up was because I want to come back to the passage that Kate was talking about on page 9, and it's kind of in your kind of rejection of panentheism, and there's nothing to look at. Maybe we could identify God as being as such, right? But there are problems with that. You're not entirely comfortable with that idea. But it seems that in part the reason why you want to reject that kind of panentheistic view is because there's more of a kind of personal relational experience that you're having with in this I thou. Like God needs to be a thou. God can't be just kind of everywhere in all things. God can't be just kind of total unity or total being as such. That's missing, it seems, something about the relationship that one ought to have with this experience. And my, I guess, not worry, my thought is, well, but it also seems as though, at least for some people, some of this experience really is coded as an experience of kind of just oneness with the universe. And that's kind of where this experience of God comes from, is this recognition that God is in all the connections and all the things. So think about, even like the lyrics of Beethoven's Ninth, and he's really talking about this kind of feeling of complete unity and brotherhood among all people in the world. Like everyone is together in this moment. And it seems like this I-thou relationship might leave out, in some ways, the idea that everything and everyone is connected together for some people in this experience, in this kind of religious experience. And so I'm wondering, is there room for that understanding of what these moments consist in for you? And does that kind of require this view of God as being as such, or like God is in all of the things? Or is that like incompatible with this kind of view that you have about what this experience consists of?
I'm not sure. Yeah, God as being seems to me not incompatible, but it also didn't seem to me obviously right. And when I resist the idea of looking for a referent, and being would be the referent, feels like it's, I was joking last night and I said, I feel like theology in its classical form comes from taking lines of poetry and putting them into a proof. Seems crazy. So I feel like religious language somehow is essentially poetic. I don't mean by that nothing refers to anything, but I mean, yeah. So that's the resistance I feel to. I said yesterday at the end that, an analytic philosophy was thinking about the reference of these terms, and then this is mind-boggling about God. What are we talking about? And I said, the continental characters are better at this. They start with poetry and literature, as the model of discourse. And I thought of this, a piece of poetry that has the phrase, "Oh, my soul," in it. And somebody asking, so what does soul exactly refer to? And then you miss the point of the sentence in a way, right? So I feel like God is like that, sort of. And I feel like it plays so many roles and so much, it's all over the place in a way. Anyway. So what I was going to say before when I said, I was cooped up for 2 years or whatever it is, this is a dream to sit and talk to people about these issues. It's just great. Really appreciate it both days.
All right, let's appreciate that.
One last thing about being. There's a joke. The genre, I mentioned one yesterday at dinner, I think, the Morgan Besser jokes. Morgan Besser was a professor at Columbia. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was the joke. So here's another one. A student comes to him and says, "Professor Morgan Besser, I'm stunned by the question, why is there something rather than nothing?" And he says, "If there was nothing, you'd still complain." Thank you, guys.